So good morning to everybody. My name is Stephen Chapman. I am the Vice President at EPC. We are an independent consultancy in the downstream energy sector, and also we are the organizers of the upcoming Middle East Technology Conference for both refining and petrochemicals, also known as METech. This year will be marking our 14th edition, and we are looking forward to connect the refining and petrochemical community to address, to exchange and identify solutions to the pressing questions and also to the challenges being faced by the global and regional downstream sectors. Today, I'm very pleased to be joined by Dan Carter, President Decarbonisation at Wood. As we all know, Wood are one of the world's leading consulting and energy companies operating across energy and materials markets. We are honoured to have Wood as our platinum sponsor for the event and also as the host to one of our pre-conference seminars. And the seminar will be focusing on delivering a sustainable future for the downstream industries in the Middle East. We're delighted to be able to catch up with Dan today ahead of the conference to discuss on certain points that we'll be discussing further at the event, some important points for the downstream sector. So Dan, a warm welcome to you. Thank you for taking the time to join us today.
Yeah, thanks, Stefan, and thanks for the opportunity to have a quick chat ahead of METech next month.
Thank you very much, Dan. So, as I said, we're very much looking forward to having the Wood team with us at METech once again. If you could, if it's possible, could you give us a sneak peek at what we can expect from both the seminar but also from one of the presenters? I believe Wood's Global Technical Director, Luca Mancuso, will be talking at METech.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you've already mentioned, the seminar this year is titled Delivering a Sustainable Future for Downstream Industries in the Middle East. And if we think about it, the Middle East is already very well placed in the race towards net zero. Competitive export products, arguably the lowest carbon intensity crude in the world, but we still need to accelerate that transition. So this is really going to be focusing on how we attain sustainability targets that supports continued growth in the Middle East and actually cements the Middle East's position at the centre of the energy and materials industry. So some of the things we're going to talk about, some of the things drive around technical solutions. So how you can diversify product portfolios to deliver on sustainability commitments. For example, looking at further driving conversion of crude to chemicals, or how we can look at things like recycling, potentially recycling products like plastic into fuels. We're also going to talk about creating and delivering roadmaps for carbon reduction, and that obviously starts with being able to understand the carbon footprint of your asset in its current state before you look at what the individual point source opportunities are for reducing those carbon emissions. And then how you take those designs from ambition to reality. So I think a step beyond some of the previous seminars we've hosted at METech, we don't just want to look at the technical solution, we also want to look more at how you can successfully deliver those projects from concept through into real operation, but actually also talk about collaboration, and particularly collaboration around some of the key developing growth areas like sustainable technology, digitalization, and how those are starting to play a part in integrated project delivery. I think the Middle East has moved on a little bit from, let's say, just bolting carbon capture onto an existing facility. We're now seeing projects that consider at the outset how to minimize the carbon intensity of product production, because with things like the CBAM legislation in Europe, admittedly at the moment only for products like cement, steel and hydrogen, but with the potential to rapidly increase its breadth, carbon intensity of production is going to be a big ticket lever in terms of competitiveness moving forward. On the side of the paper, so actually Luca's going to take a real focus on reducing the carbon footprint of a specific asset. So he's going to talk a little bit about how we reduce carbon intensity from some of the big ticket items on existing refineries and petrochemicals facilities. For example, moving from grey to blue hydrogen production, what modifications and opportunities there might be for existing plant. He's going to talk about what to do with captured CO2. Options beyond just transportation and sequestration. Are there potential to actually utilize that CO2 in further product development? And then also how to change fossil gas oil hydrotreaters into SAF production units. So converting what we have today in terms of some of our fossil fuel hydrotreating capacity to be able to produce more sustainable aviation fuel in those geographies that are fortunate enough to have the availability of feedstock to consider that as an option.
That sounds great. We're looking forward to hearing in more detail about that at the upcoming meeting. And as you mentioned, low carbon solutions are very much the focus within the industry at the moment. I wondered, from your perspective, do you see refineries already starting to benefit from implementing some of those solutions, or is it maybe still a little bit too early to tell?
I think we've seen a shift in other parts of the world towards some of these types of solutions. We've seen refineries in Europe convert from producing crude oil to almost 100% bio or alternative feedstocks. The same in the Americas as well. I think the challenge more in the Middle East is there isn't necessarily that volume of bio feedstock as an alternative for substitution of the feedstock, especially when you consider the size and the scale of many of the facilities that exist throughout the Middle East. So this is why our focus here is really on the actions you can take to reduce that carbon intensity. But a lot of the spotlight goes on to big capex solutions like integration of hydrogen or carbon capture. There's still much more that we can do today through improving the efficiency of our existing facilities, giving us real tangible short-term paybacks just through better housekeeping, better maintenance procedures, perhaps even considering more of the cost of carbon when we're looking at how we reuse low-grade heat within our facilities, implementing waste heat boilers, those types of solutions. So it's a spectrum. And I think you have to do the small stuff first to be able to consider what the pathway towards carbon capture and the integration of hydrogen as potential fuel looks like.
Yeah, very much so. We recently had COP28. There was huge discussions, a lot of noise in the media as well. So much has been said about this COP28 and also the encouragement to phase out unabated use of fossil fuels. However, when we look at the reality, we know that the world will still require liquid fuels for different energy and also power needs. In your opinion, what are the short and longer term steps in achieving what we want to achieve?
So I think I summarise the main takeaways from COP28 in terms of that short, medium and longer term horizon. So in the short term, we had commitments from a number of major oil and gas producers, refiners, to try and zero out methane emissions by 2030. So that's through things like fugitive emissions, through poor maintenance, compressor seal leaks, but also through unplanned flaring. And I think that's one of those drives we were just talking about that has an immediate impact on revenue streams and profitability as well. Then when you start to look at the medium term, then we are starting to look at alternatives like sustainable aviation fuel, e-fuels potentially in the Middle East as a region through combining captured CO2 with renewable hydrogen, but also how we reach that pathway towards really commercializing technologies like carbon capture. In Wood, we've been working on a project in the Middle East that will increase the world's global carbon CO2 transmission and distribution capacity by 25%. It's a huge scale project that only the Middle East can support, but that also requires the refiners, the petrochemicals producers in those regions to implement the capture solutions to make the full use of that infrastructure. So one is enabling the other. Yeah, we're also seeing a lot of developments in the hydrogen space. A lot of focus on renewable hydrogen. I don't think there's enough focus on actually reducing the carbon footprint of existing sources of hydrogen production compared to some of these larger scale new projects. But those solutions are starting to become more viable. The costs are starting to come down, albeit perhaps slower than we thought they might have done 5 or 10 years ago, because of the pace of manufacturing production and some of the global macro issues that have impacted, not just our industry, but the world. But that definite drive and commitment is there. And the world does need liquid fuels. I mean, if those liquid fuels are used in systems where the CO2 can be captured, and maybe in the future that's also looking for a circular carbon economy, once we've reduced the CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere, then they can both be technically achievable and also reach a point where they are profitable.
Very much so. I think it's a question of balance. I think it's
absolutely.
Yeah. To get there, I think we've discussed this at past conferences, past events. We need clear directives, clear regulations to help us on the way. However, that's not always the reality. There's a relative absence, I think, of a common regional regulations, and you see, because of that, you see collaborations and dialogues between producers being really important in the current landscape, this transition we're going through.
So, in terms of the regulatory environment, subsidies should be there to encourage the adoption and commercialization of technology, but they can't be used for technology to stand on its own 2 feet for the longer term. Those solutions have to reach a commercial reality. And that's why I quite like the cross-border adjustment mechanism in Europe, because that sets a baseline for domestically produced products, which if imports have a higher carbon intensity, they then attract a fee. So that over time, we should actually encourage domestic producers to reduce the carbon intensity of their own products, but also importers, so they've still got some market potential. You think that's then starting to move towards a mechanism that actually increases competition, increases the attractiveness of the adoption of technology, and gets us more towards where we want to be. In terms of collaboration, though, there's elements of risk as well, right? So there's risk around building a new technology, delivering it, operating it, even if it's a step out from traditional. And this goes hand in hand with the commercial conversation as well, because many operators are not keen to take on the full liabilities for a CO2 capture plant if it is a cost to their business rather than the benefit. So we need further collaboration between not just the operators themselves in terms of looking at networks of CO2 capture or hydrogen hubs to share out and reduce the overall cost, but also working with their technology partners, working with their engineering partners, and those who are financing the projects to make sure that risk landscape is understood and the risk is apportioned best to the party that can deliver it or can manage it.
It's very important. Yeah, mitigating the risks, sharing the workload, sharing the risks, obviously.
Yeah.
So, one last question. It's last but not least. If you could leave one message with the audience at METech, one message for the industry from Wood, what would it be?
So for me, it would be decide your own future. Plan what you're going to do for your asset that makes sense to reduce its carbon footprint. And then perhaps modify that plan or take advantage of regulations as they become available. Don't react, because I think a lot of the industry at the moment is reacting to announcements by government, by policy, by regulators that might not make sense for them. So, yeah, plan. plan, decide your own future.
Yeah, totally agree. So Dan, thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure, as always, speaking with you today. Looking forward to METEC, welcoming the Wood team at METEC once again, and very much looking forward to the seminar, which I'll remind everyone is focusing on delivering a sustainable future for the downstream industries in the Middle East. So once again, Dan, thank you very much.